Welcome to Soul Forum. We're delighted to have you as we attempt to kind of democratize the experience of soul. Each conversation in this second season takes you deeper into the experience of your own body, the collective body, earth body, and even the cosmic body as we explore the way soul finds expression in our time. We hope what you discover along the way helps you journey a little deeper into your own soul body. Welcome. In the last two episodes, we explored with Brian how he uses his commitment to creating art from found materials as a vehicle to inspire others to honor the greater collective body, or maybe even cosmic body. In this final episode of our series with him, he shares with April the magic and commitment of an artist's path.
Brian, thank you for being here with me today. I'm excited to hear your story and then, hear about your intention and your impressions into what is the cosmic body that we all hang out in.
Yeah.
So, the artist life is the path less traveled. So how did you get to be here?
Yeah. Maybe the path for some artists is a linear one, and how they always knew. I know some people are like, I always knew. In high school, I was like, I'm going to be a doctor. I'm super interested in the human body. I still am. So, I went to school down at UC San Diego, and I was a pre-med. So I took all those classes. I took the MCAT, all those things. But I studied cognitive science was my major, and human computer interaction was my specialization. Wow. And it was kind of like my subconscious just being like, there's many paths you can take from cog sci. Mm-hmm. But I knew I didn't want to work in a lab, and I knew I was liked people, and I knew, I was kind of like in HCI, I was able to work on the design of interfaces, and both digital and analog. And that, we were actually like designing environments, which it's super interesting because these things are now starting to come into reality, things that we were working on in 2000. Yeah. And so that part was fascinating. And I had been told by my family that art was not a viable career path. So
you certainly weren't the first person to hear that one.
Yeah. So I was like, well, I can't be an artist, or I was, I just didn't believe that in myself, or believe that was doable. But it was something that is just so fundamental, I had grown up as a very creative person. And after school, I came back up to the Bay and worked at a usability research. I was a UX UI researcher. Giving designs and redesign recommendations on websites and software based on our research. This was 2005. So websites still didn't really work super well. And usability was just kind of forming as something important. Yeah. And these big companies, maybe they'd have a usability team, but they're building websites or software that, millions of people are using, and they're not thinking about the user. So it was the ethnography, cognitive ethnography, that is how do people actually use things? Yeah. And then design towards that versus here's how a designer or an engineer thinks of it, and then try to just get the people to work, into this weird maze of how to do an operation. So did that for less than 2 years. was kind of like after 6 months, I learned everything I was really interested in. And then I was just like, I'm just here because it's comfortable. Also at that time was reading a book called Cradle to Cradle, which is, it was like reading my own thoughts. And, you know, it was very much about changing the way that we design things to think of the end of something's lifespan from the conception of the design. And that was just completely spoke to me. And, you know, I was in the tech world and it was like, well, we're not doing anything quote unquote bad, but we're definitely not doing anything good. And the stuff that we're working on isn't making any changes. So the other thing is I had always worked with my hands too. So I had done 3 years of woodshop in high school and learned a lot more than I even realized that I learned. And I was like, I need to give these things a shot. I need to give my hands a shot before I like sit here, because I'm definitely not thriving in this place. And so I left and I went to Alaska. One of my best friends who I'd done a bunch of mountaineering with in California was like, dude, you have to come out here. And so I was going there for my 2 weeks of vacation, but I ended up leaving my job right before I went there. So once I finally got there, took a couple days from Anchorage to actually land out there, but I became a mountaineering guide, like kind of like junior mountaineering guide out there. I led hikes out on the glacier and did some fly in, fly out backcountry tours. And we've got this amazing, the tallest wooden structure in North America there. It's a 14-story milling processing plant for the copper mine that was there. And it's like this living piece of history. And so being out there, you know, reuse wasn't even really a term at that time. It was just the way of life. And so, you know, everything that came down the road, like there's a cost to that and there's a cost to take stuff back out. So anything that has utility is going to stick around. And metal is absolutely one of those things that, you know, everybody who lives out there has some stash of metal somewhere where they're like, oh yeah, well, that'll get used, you know? So anyhow, then I came back and I took my first class in metalwork at the Crucible.
In Oakland.
In Oakland, yep. My design idea at the time, what I wanted to make was a chaise lounge out of car chassis. Like I'd never worked in metal, but in the cradle to cradle, like they coined the term circular economy in cradle to cradle. Basically, if you're making things out of something that is fully upcyclable and like built to go into another system or fully biodegradable, then we actually have a future. And so I was like, oh, well, I've never worked in metal, but this thing already has bends in it. So if I don't have to do the bending and they're the same bend, you know, it's uniform, okay, then I can just cut and paste it back together. That's probably not too hard. You know, I went in and my instructor was awesome. He wasn't like, it's a little, might be tough for the first project. You know, he was just like, let's learn to weld first. So I was like, okay. So I shifted and made a couple tables that were designed from found materials. And one was a kind of end table made out of a structural I-beam. And there was a older woman in the class. She was a 76-year-old ex-statistics professor from Cal. She was like, when you finish that, I will buy that from you. And I was like, what? You know, I wasn't even done with it. I just gave her the concept. And so I told her my story and she said, you know, oh, this is your first project in metal. You know, you found what you're supposed to do. And so those were those words of encouragement that were just like exactly what I needed to hear when I needed to hear it to keep going.
Yeah.
I made that table. then I made another one for her, right? So, because I'm like,
You're like,
this
you
is
can't
the
have my first
original.
project.
This is like the first one. So I kind of hid that I was learning, I was learning a craft, but I was making functional art.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wasn't an artist. So I still was able to do this thing.
Mm-hmm.
In college, I had started really learning to draw, right?
Mm-hmm.
I read Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain, and I was studying the brain. So then I took a year of Mandarin at school just because it's a visual, pictorial, written language, and it actually, requires your right brain to really to write it, but to read and write it. And
But
so
you
I
get
just
a creativity workout doing that.
I just looked at it like a muscle, and it's like, I want more of this. So I'm going to go into the gym and flex this part of my brain as hard as I can, because I literally was studying that at the time.
Yeah.
too.
Also, it's not easy.
Yeah, no, it was not. And unfortunately, I've forgotten everything except how to say my Chinese is very bad. That workout, right? That really served me well, because I just continued to
that's amazing.
access my right brain.
Yeah.
And so, I knew I wasn't going to become a doctor. I was like, I don't know what I'm going to didn't know what I was going to do. And it always was this underlying thing that I wanted to be an artist.
Yeah.
But it just took a couple of years of just learning my craft, getting a style. And really I wanted to learn metal, right? I'd never worked in metal. So I took classes at the Crucibles, has all these classes, all these different departments. So I went in to metal top to bottom, from taking jewelry classes and learning it on the smallest scale that I could learn. I did blacksmithing, I did foundry work, all of these different things, as well as continuing with wood. And then I became an instructor there very quickly. And, I've taught there for, well more than a decade. I created my own art school, right? I'd talk to friends of mine. I'm like, I'm thinking of going back to art school. They're like, don't go back to art school. You're doing it yourself. You're in art school. And there are pluses and minuses to both of those things. And then not only was I at the Crucible, but I was fully utilizing the amazing community college system that we have in Oakland and the Bay Area. So I took classes through the Laney College system. I took classes at DBC, and I had a painting mentor for 4.5 years there, where I took.
So you're just taking all different kinds of art classes.
I was taking, so yes, I went to Burning Man. I've been to Burning Man a couple times, and now it's part of my job to go to Burning Man. But I came back from there one year, it's 2007 or 2009, and I was out in New York for 11 days, and I think I went to 8 museums in 11 days. And I saw the Kandinsky exhibit at the Guggenheim. They had a retrospective, and the Guggenheims were friends with Kandinsky, so they have the largest collection of his work. And I'd never even heard of him or seen his work. Maybe I'd heard of him, but I saw his work, and that was still at that time when I started out making and doing art. I was like, I don't want to know any art history. I don't care where I fall in the spectrum of whatever someone else has decided is art. And I don't want to be influenced.
Right.
I literally just want to make stuff and in my own little bubble.
Yeah.
And that was an important and formative time, because I really was just exploring my own, what was coming out of me.
Yeah.
And that was great.
Yeah.
But then when I saw that exhibit, I was like, oh, this guy, even though we don't even have the same medium,
Yeah.
is speaking the same words of how I'm talking about art. And so, like, I want to know more about other people who they're doing this with art. Then I looked at Kandinsky's history is really interesting because he was a full-on professor. He didn't take his first art class, which was a figure drawing class, until he was 30. And like I was at a retrospective of his at the Guggenheim, right?
Yeah.
He didn't even start till he was 30.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm 28. If I go home and sign up for a figure drawing class right now, the next semester starts and I'll be 29. So I have 1 year on it. I'm like, so it's still possible. And so I did that. And figure drawing was awesome, but I wanted to get into painting. So I took one figure drawing class and then I started taking painting classes. And the painting instructor that I walked into his class up at Merritt, he was one of those instructors who you hear them and you're just like, this is my person. They're
resonated
just
with him
completely,
or he resonated with you, whichever.
Yeah. And it was just like, he's teaching about life. His medium just happens to be art, you know, and I had that in college with an organic chemistry professor who I was like, this guy's just teaching about life. But like OChem is his medium.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's the best teachers are that. And when I walked in first class, I'm like, oh, he's one of these guys. And so I then took classes with him for 4.5 years until he died. And he was in his late 70s when I met him. But that was really where I learned art history. That was also like formative, you know?
Yeah.
And so,
well, you had these nice turning points along the way where like the right person showed up to give you the validation that you needed to then take that next step.
Yeah.
So then when did you decide, so you said something about, well, I'm a craftsman. So then what happened? When did you give yourself permission to say, oh, actually, I mean, obviously you're like studying it like math, like you're living it, right? But it sounds like you were still calling yourself a craftsman even through this.
Yeah, it took a while. I put together and like curated my first group show in 2008 and then did that again in 2009. And in that, I was like finally making and showing art pieces. So I kind of started saying like, oh, maybe I guess I can call myself an artist at this point. But that was like 2 or 3 years into doing all this. And I was still just the nature of how things worked, right? Like, okay, I had like 6 jobs during that time because I was an instructor, like teaching welding. I was, I was making furniture, I was making jewelry, fine art. I was doing general construction a bunch. Then I was still working at my old job. They would hire me contractually. So I was limping along for a long time there and was like doing the starving artist thing for 7 years.
And then you're like, I don't know, is this sustainable?
Well, it wasn't sustainable.
Right.
And I was just kind of at the end of my rope. I wasn't in a good place. I was very much like losing hope in the world and in myself because I was doing what I was called to do. Right. I was like, I know that this is what I'm supposed to do. What everybody says is if you do what you love, then it's going to work out. And you're like, well, I'm doing all that.
Yeah.
And it's not working out.
Yeah.
And so, and I'm actively trying to not be a jerk, and so I'm like, feel like I'm a good person and I'm like doing what I love. Like, why isn't anything working? Mm-hmm. And around that time, I actually was introduced to the Buddhist practice that I have, which I chant Nam Myoho Renge Kyo in the morning and the evening. And so when I connected with that Buddhist practice, one of the first things that they said that stuck with me was like, if you think the answers or the problems lie outside of yourself, you'll inherently be let down because both exist right here. Mm-hmm. And it's up to you. I was realizing I don't have any plan, you know, and my relationship with my family was not good. And there was just so much anger because they'd ask me like, so what's your plan? You know? And I'd be like, fuck. I'm like, look, because I had left a stable career path, right? Which was killing me. But I was like, the plan is I'm an artist. I'm making art. You're seeing the plan right in front of you. But the reality was I didn't have a plan. And actually, as I chanted, what I learned was the plan that I actually deeply had was someone's going to find me. Like somebody's just going to come along and be like, you're a genius. We just want to dump money on you, you know, which is a possibility out there in the world. But again, in chanting and gaining wisdom and actually starting to look at, okay, who are other people that are successful? When they get asked the question, did this happen because of luck or because of hard work? Almost all of them say that like you create your luck through hard work. And so, yes, I was learning my craft, but I wasn't putting myself out there. And I had totally bought into the starving artist.
Yeah.
Like
I heard that.
That romanticized thing. It was awesome in some ways. I was living as the artist. It was so cool, but it was just nothing was coming out of it.
Well, it sounds like it ran its course. Like you wouldn't give that back, and you're not going to do that into your 70s.
No, no way. No way. So then it's like, well, what do you want to do with this thing? You have skills. What do you want? And that, again, came from this practice of like, set a goal and set a huge goal. As you start to see things work, you're like, well, that actually worked, that thing that I was just chanting for. So if that worked, why not set the biggest possible goal?
Yeah.
Most people only achieve 60% of whatever they set out to do.
Yeah.
So if you set it down here, you're barely even getting anything. If you set it up there, even if you got 60%, you're doing and achieving more than 90% of the world.
Right.
And so, you know, I have a huge goal.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Do you want to share your goal?
Yeah. So my goal is by 2030 or towards 2030 to become the top sculptor in the United States who works in found materials to create the most value possible for communities and future generations, to educate on where we land in the spectrum of consumption and waste, and the inherent and interconnectedness of all of our actions between each other and the planet. What that most value means is to have a noticeable positive impact on American culture around, again, our relationship to single-use plastic, or just our ways of thinking, of designing things, right? Because there's so many better ways. And, you know, this really, I think, ties back into the bigger question of this podcast, right? Of the body and the interconnectedness.
Well, yeah, what is the cosmic body for you and your hopeful impact?
Yeah, like I draw on my Buddhist practice where each one of us is the microcosm of the macrocosm of the universe. So every single thing that we see in society, even if we don't want to believe that the war in Ukraine has anything, how is that related to me? How am I responsible for that? Well, actually, what are the parts of myself that I have not looked at and examined, that I still have to uncover, that I actually, this is showing me I actively need to go deeper into person-to-person interaction in all of our human relationships. Where is it that I go to that place that's still left in my mind of, we have nothing to say here, screw you, we're done. That on an interpersonal level, if you extrapolate that out to the size of two countries having a conversation, that is what war is. And so how can I make the changes in myself to evolve past that, you know, to eliminate that, however you want to phrase it. So then the other beautiful part is that all of us are connected. And so as we make those changes within ourselves, we're able to help others to make those changes as well, or to see why a certain path, a certain cause leads to a certain effect.
Yeah.
And so as we make the change in ourselves, we actually have bigger muscles for helping that to happen. And as we help others, those ripple effects ripple out to the cosmic body as a whole, to society as a whole, to our planet, to our universe.
Yeah.
So that is how I understand it, or I think of it. And it's that, like, it's that beautiful thing, because it's so empowering at the same time, that my actions as an individual actually do affect the whole. I completely believe and know that to be true.
Each one of us is the microcosm of the macrocosm of the very universe. How might we each deepen our understanding of our own body as a contribution to the greater universal cosmic body? In our next episode, I sit down with Karen. Her life story as a child of Western civilization to an awakened soul passionate about the environment, to one who now embraces our climate in collapse, is a story about how each of us might embrace the wonder of the earth itself as the primary location of our truest individual selves. Can you find your soul within the earth body? Join us, won't you?
This episode of Soul Forum has been brought to you by Storycatcher for iPhone, a fun and simple tool that helps you create shareable keepsake video stories. Be the documentarian in your circles. Find Storycatcher, spelt as all one word, on the Apple App Store. You may attend Soul Forum Live each Sunday morning at Creekside Commons in Lafayette, California. The 30-minute presentation is also live streamed via YouTube and Facebook, where people interact via the chat. After the live stream is complete, for those gathering in person, we then enter into a non-recorded group discussion on the day's topic. We'd love for you to join us for Soul Forum.